And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us once again. It's been a very busy last 24 to 48 hours in Major League Baseball ahead of Thanksgiving, much to all of our surprises. Usually before Thanksgiving, even the first week after Thanksgiving, there's not too much to report. Not the case this year. The only thing we got last year of any significance was the Edwin Diaz deal back to the New York Mets. 5 years, $100 million. Well, we've already had more than that already this offseason. Aaron Nola, one of the top starting pitchers, possibly the top starting pitcher, depending on who you talk to in this year's free agent class. 7 years, $172 million. If you guys saw our video on Sunday when that news broke, we appreciate you joining us once again. But if you guys want to check that instant reaction, go back to our YouTube page, hit that subscribe button, and check that one out as well. But a lot of moves already today as well. Yoshinobu Yamamoto officially is posted. Bidding can begin tomorrow. Teams can begin talking to him tomorrow. Teams will have a 45-day window to negotiate a deal and get a deal done. There will be a posting fee going back to the Oryx Buffaloes in return. Close of this window is going to be January 4th of next year. I expect this probably to get done by the winter meetings, at the winter meetings, or maybe a day or two thereafter. I do not expect this to stretch around Christmas, so keep your eyes peeled for teams bidding and bidding quickly to try to get him on their roster. What could a contract look like for Yamamoto? You're looking probably in the $200 million range. We saw the money that Aaron Nola got. He's a little bit older and coming off of a 4+ ERA season. As good as a pitcher as he is, in the postseason, is able to come out there and post every single day. And isn't one of those guys who's just going to throw 110 innings and call it good as a starting pitcher. He's going to take the ball every fifth day and throw you 175, 200 innings. In fact, over the last 5-6 years, the only pitcher to throw more innings than Aaron Nola is not his own teammate Zach Wheeler, it's Garrett Cole. So that's how consistent Aaron Nola has been. But you look at Yamamoto, he's 25 years old, significantly younger. Could argue he has a little bit better pedigree than any other starting pitcher to ever come out of Japan. So we could see that guarantee reach $200 to $240 million. I'm expecting the years on this to go between 7 and 8 years. I think he's looking for that long-term security. I don't think we're going to have an issue like we did last offseason with Kodai Senga. Only got 5 years, $75 million. A little bit surprised that the Mets ultimately were able to get him for that price. As good as Senga has proved to be in Major League Baseball, that contract looks like possibly the best asset on their entire roster at the moment. Yamamoto, I think teams are going to try to not miss on another talent like this coming out of Japan, and they're going to bid hard for him. Who could he ultimately go to? LA Dodgers absolutely need some starting pitching. They were in there for Aaron Nola. In fact, they had a higher offer anyway on the table for Aaron Nola of the 7 years, 172 that he got from the Philadelphia Phillies. Going into this offseason, Philadelphia hoped to get a 5 or 6 year deal for Nola. Ultimately, with how many teams are looking for starting pitching, let alone how many starting pitchers they need on those out of these teams. There just wasn't a spot for them to go anywhere less than 7 years. That's why I think 8 years, 7, 8 years is what it's ultimately going to take for Yamamoto to get the deal done. But the Dodgers are going to be in there. Shohei, even if he does sign with the Dodgers, isn't going to pitch next year. They need some starting pitchers. They could go young again, but I don't think they ever want to do that again. The whole point of the last year for them was to reset their payroll, to reset their luxury tax considerations so that they could go out there and make the biggest and best offer out there to Shohei. I'm sure other teams will be out there as well interested in Shohei, obviously, but they're still going to need some starting pitching. Blake Snell, I'm expecting them to circle back to his camp as well and try to get something done. Snell, I think his market is going to move very quickly as well. We should see the trade market start to pick up as well. But the Dodgers are going to be in there for Yamamoto along with the Seattle Mariners, the San Francisco Giants, San Diego Padres to a certain extent, the Texas Rangers, the St. Louis Cardinals, the Chicago Cubs, the Boston Red Sox, the New York Yankees, New York Mets, and the Toronto Blue Jays. If I had to pick a favorite right now, I'd say maybe a slight lean towards the New York Mets. But I don't think anybody's really run away with this one yet for Yamamoto. Other news that we saw, Lance Lynn, the former LA Dodger, is going to go back to where it all began with the St. Louis Cardinals on a 1 year plus an option type of a deal. Guarantee is $11 million. $10 million the first year with a $1 million buyout for the second season. Total value of the contract could reach $24 million with incentives. So Lance Lynn gets to go back there and at least give them a nice floor for that rotation. This is a team that really needed two frontline starting pitchers. Lance Lynn is no longer that. But he does give them probably 150 to 175 innings as long as he avoids giving up the gopher ball at the extent that he did this past season. Before this past year, he was around a 1 home run per 9 inning type of a guy. This past year, he was up over 2, both with the White Sox and with the Dodgers. Everybody thought those numbers were going to improve with the Dodgers, and while his ERA did drop a little bit, with a little bit better of a team playing behind him, you still saw the home run numbers go even higher in LA. So we'll see how things work out with him going back to St. Louis. Other bit of news is that Ronaldo Lopez, that's right, Ronaldo Lopez, the bullpen arm, is going to go to the Atlanta Braves. 3 years, $30 million. I liken this to the contract a few years ago the Texas Rangers signed with Mike Minor. At the time he was coming into free agency, he was thought of as a reliever, former starter turned reliever. That's kind of what Ronaldo Lopez has been the past couple of years. We saw him get dealt at the trade deadline, and thereafter, after things didn't work out with the LA Angels this past season, they tried to save a little bit of money. I think the Guardians ultimately ended up picking him up. But he goes to Atlanta where he's going to be stretched out as a starter. I'll be shocked if he breaks camp as a starter with them. But he has that flexibility as being one of the high leverage arms that use in that 7th, 8th inning role. I'm sure they'll give him a chance to start when they go out of spring training. But I think the biggest part of this for them is that at least gives them more than 3 outs that they can count on Lopez for. He is a former starter. He should be able to get more than 3 outs in an outing. And I think Atlanta is going to go big game hunting. We saw them trade a number of players off of their roster before the non-tender deadline and then go ahead and non-tender another 7 players. They only have 30 players right now on their 40-man roster. They are going to make some big transactions out there in Atlanta. This is just the first of many. Great get for them to solidify the bullpen at the very least and at least give them some length out of that starting rotation. Do I think this solves their issues with that rotation? I do not. They're still going to be looking at the top end of that free agent market. There's been a lot of whispers over the last 24 hours since the Aaron Nola deal got consummated that they're going to quickly turn towards Sonny Gray. Now, the Braves like to move quickly at the beginning of free agency. That's why I think Sonny Gray could go quickly here if things work out with the Atlanta Braves. He is a Tennessee native anyway, so that's close to the Atlanta Braves home anyway. We'll see if things happen with Sonny Gray. But we're going to see some of these starters come off the market a little bit earlier, I think, than what we would have in past years. Looking at Jordan Montgomery, I think the market for him has already boiled down to 2 or 3 teams. Just going to be a matter of the money for him. Teams could say, hey, let's wait for the Shohei thing, but I don't think they're really going to do that for a high-quality starter like Blake Snell, like Sonny Gray, like Jordan Montgomery. I think they want to get those starters, especially when you consider how many teams need starting pitching. Welcome back, Jordan. Welcome back, Robert. Appreciate you guys joining us once again. Feel free to hit that like button, hit the heart in the chat. It really does help us out. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Follow us over on X, formerly known as Twitter, at UpsideSN, and on Facebook, Upside Sports Network. Those are just some of the headlines that we've seen over the last 24 to 48 hours, but there's still a whole lot more to get into. So without further ado, let's get into it. In case you guys are unfamiliar with this site, this is MLB Trade Rumors. Great site to kind of get little snippets here and there. They do have some blind spots when it comes to their coverage every now and again, but overall they keep it pretty much very factual for you. They try not to give too much of a bias one way or the other, but I think in their effort to try to minimize the amount of bias that might be coming from some of their writers that they have working for them, I think they give you a little bit less information than what you might otherwise get from a site like ours, a show like ours, or even from Twitter, from all the other reporters that are posting information. So just kind of take everything with you that you see out there with a grain of salt, that you might be relying on a little bit outdated information now. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even this site was much better because it was only run by a few guys and the information was a lot more accurate and a lot more readily available. Now they started to outsource that information just a little bit, and I'm not sure it's worked to their advantage. But let's get into some of the information. Top of the list here, Tigers interested in Seth Lugo. Lugo, of course, had a good year with the Padres last year. He was one of the many cost-cutting moves the Padres really made at the end of the year. They're going to move off of the contract for Juan Soto. We saw them trade off the contract of Scott Barlow. They chose to not pick up the option on Waka, Lugo, Martinez, among others, and they're still going to probably get rid of at least one or two more salaries in that $7 to $10 million range. They're trying to get under $200 million in total payroll, and so Lugo is not going to be going back to San Diego. So, with that being said, where could he ultimately end up going? Lugo would be a good fit there, kind of fill the role in Detroit of the Eduardo Rodriguez role, kind of a lower cost option for them. We saw John Paul Morosi kind of detail today on MLB Network that he thinks the Detroit Tigers could be a team that wins the division in the AL Central as soon as next year. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's true. I still think the Minnesota Twins, even without Kenta Maeda and Sonny Gray, are going to have a better rotation, and there's not too much competition in the AL Central. None of these teams are going to be competing for a World Series, but I still think, even with all those taken into consideration, the Detroit Tigers are still a year away. You look at the contracts that they have on their books, guys like Javier Baez, it's kind of a team stuck in the middle. And until they figure out what they're going to do long term with a couple of their different positions, especially in that starting rotation, I don't think they're going to be competing for a division crown, let alone a World Series. So kind of take these things with a grain of salt. When you see interested in Seth Lugo, he might fill a role, but is it really going to push them over the top? I don't think so, but it might give them a solid floor like the Lance Lynn signing does for the St. Louis Cardinals. Second item, of course, is the Yamamoto being posted by the Oryx Buffaloes. We got into that right off the top of the show. He was absolutely fantastic over the last few years. We'll see what ultimately happens with where he goes. Sarah, I think he could go to your Cardinals. I think that's actually one of the more likely teams that he goes to, but I think the Mets are still the front runner there in my estimation. Braves, we talked a little bit about that Ronaldo Lopez signing. 100-mile-an-hour fastball, really dominant power-type pitcher. A little bit surprised Dave Dombrowski, after just signing Aaron Nola, didn't try to get him on the free agent market. He seems to be the type of pitcher he really goes for. Dombrowski really likes power-type arms. So look at guys like Jordan Hicks, Josh Hader anyway, as players who might ultimately go there in free agency. They need to build up that bullpen just a little bit after we saw it implode in that NLCS against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Craig Kimbrell, of course, had a couple of blown saves in Game 3 and 4. Zach Britton announced his retirement from Major League Baseball. Was absolutely dynamic for several years there with the Baltimore Orioles, starter turned reliever. Really kind of figured out things with one pitch, kind of like Mariano Rivera had that cutter, the devastating cutter. Britton had one pitch that he really kind of perfected. Ultimately, injuries cut his career short. I thought he would be a great kind of a bounce-back candidate last offseason. Ultimately, things didn't work out for him to latch on with the Major League team, and now here we sit. He's going to move on to the next phase of his life. Aaron Nola, we talked a little bit about that. Going back to Philadelphia, sounded like the Philadelphia Phillies were originally looking for a 5 or 6 year deal, even with a guy pitching a +4 ERA. 172 might sound like a lot from when you're looking from the outside looking in, but when you look at the starting pitching market as a whole and what he's been able to provide for the Phillies, I still think this is a hometown discount type of a contract for them. He ultimately declined other more money elsewhere, and they could really drug this out a little bit longer to even rack up those offers even higher, but he wanted to go back to Philadelphia. They already had the introductory press conference for him. Congratulations, Aaron Nola and his family. Welcome back, Paul. White Sox said they are willing to listen to anyone, any chance they move Luis Robert, and any chance the Giants try. I think Luis Robert, Roberts, however you want to call it, I think he's going to be more of a trade deadline acquisition. I think they're going to try to capitalize on the market at that point. Right now, I think with the pitching market being so hot, I think they're going to focus on moving guys like Dylan Cease or other starters that other pitchers that they have on the roster teams might be interested in. But I think having a bat like that with the contract status of him, I think that would be the perfect trade deadline acquisition or even next off season. But if a team bowls him over, absolutely. The White Sox are open for business. Chris Getz, the GM there, comes from a player development, scouting background, so he wants to rebuild that farm system immediately. We've seen that already with the number of transactions that he's made. The Aaron Bummer transaction, a 6.75 ERA guy out of the bullpen, even though his numbers suggest that he was pitching better than that, still was able to get you 5 players, a couple of them that were going to be non-tendered, a couple of guys who are underperforming, former high draft picks. But they got a plethora of talent that if they get one guy to even hit off of that, that's still a worthwhile acquisition, and they're still going to get major league production out of a couple of different guys in that trade already. I think that's a massive win for Chris Getz already this offseason, but I do think Dylan Cease, probably the biggest name that I believe moves out of that White Sox team. If I had to guess, a couple of teams that have been connected with him, the Baltimore Orioles, the St. Louis Cardinals have been connected with him in the past. As of today, the LA Dodgers have been reported as saying they've had conversations as recently as this past weekend concerning Dylan Cease. It seems like the Dodgers are willing to really go out there and spend this offseason. We'll get into some of the Mike Trout rumors here in just a moment. But for the White Sox, getting teams with the best prospect pools in the business, talking about the Dodgers, talking about the Orioles, those are exactly the teams you want in there for your starting pitcher. Dylan Cease, off of a down year, I think he absolutely gets moved before opening day. I don't think they want to see his status drop anymore. And a former, Cy Young type of a pitcher, I still think he has it in him, but remains to be seen how he bounces back next season. Speaking of the Mike Trout rumors, there were some rumors about Shohei Ohtani going to the LA Dodgers, and then the Dodgers being willing to part with whatever best prospects the Angels would want to be able to bring in the Mike Trout. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the Dodgers would be willing to move their best prospects for a Mike Trout. That contract, as Joel Sherman so eloquently put on MLB Network today, that contract is absolutely underwater. What does that mean? That means if you were to sign Mike Trout as a free agent right now, he's been able to play in less than 50% of games over the past 3 seasons. His numbers show a little bit of a decline over the last 162 as well, and we might finally be seeing some of the issues as far as health that might deteriorate his career going forward. You look at the injuries that a guy like David Wright had with the New York Mets a few years back. This is very similar, kind of a chronic back issue that Mike Trout is dealing with. I don't think that we're going to see the Mike Trout of 2018 again. I think we might still be getting a dynamic player that needs to be moved to DH, and having 2 guys who need to play the DH spot already on your roster in Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani for the Dodgers, first and foremost, isn't going to work. Now, you could, of course, play him in center, but I think James Outman already is a better defensive center fielder. Mookie Betts, you could move into to play second base, I suppose, full-time and put Trout out there and right. But I just don't think it works long-term for the health of the player. And why would the Dodgers give up their top prospects for a guy that's already has a contract underwater? What that means is the 5 years, 150 that you'd sign him to if he was a free agent right now. But no, you got to pay him for 7 years at $250 million? You'd have to pay down $100 million of that contract just to break even on that trade if you're the Dodgers. So I don't think they'll be attaching their best prospects to it. Now, if you're talking about attaching some starting pitching to it, I could at least hear you out a little bit further. But you're not going to be giving up your top arms. But we'll see what happens with the Dodgers going forward. They are expected to spend this offseason. I think they'll push as hard as they can for Shohei Ohtani and then pivot to some starting pitching. We talked a little bit in recent days about the trade possibility of them going for a guy like Willy Adames and Corbin Burnes from the Milwaukee Brewers, both of whom are in the final years of their deal. Adames would kind of be their everyday, shortstop there for them, fill in the hole that's been left by Corey Seager and Trey Turner in recent years. He would be a great boon for them. They'd be able to get a compensation pick back for him as well if he leaves in free agency, like the other two have done. Corbin Burns, same thing. If they bring him in before the start of the season, and he's there throughout the entirety of that season, they don't trade him at the deadline, they could get a compensation pick back for him if he goes elsewhere. Other news from around Major League Baseball: Brandon Woodruff. Some headlines as far as the reason why the Brewers decided to non-tender him. Sounds like his injury could keep him out anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, which means at the earliest we're talking trade deadline when he gets back. At the latest, we're saying he's missing 2 full seasons. So we'll see where he ultimately ends up going. I think teams are still very interested in him. I think the report was that over 20 teams had already reached out to his agent concerning his availability. What could it ultimately cost to get him in? I'm expecting multi-year deals for Brendan Woodruff at this point, considering that this injury really could take 2 years away from Brendan Woodruff's career. He owns a 3.2 earned run average for the entirety of his career. He is a frontline starting pitcher, and we'll see where he ultimately goes this offseason. I think he could sign a little bit early here as well. There is a lot of interest, though, so that might take some time to sort out, but I'm expecting by the winter meetings we get some resolution on Brandon Woodruff. Back injury that is just going to get worse. I wish not, but yeah, it is going to get worse for Mike Trout. I just hope he has a little bit longer of a career than a guy like David Wright. Mike Trout was the best player in Major League Baseball for a considerable period of time. He kind of took over as the quote-unquote face, never really was given that credit as far as taking over that spot. Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani kind of taking over that now. But injuries sound like they're going to short-circuit his career, and a little bit of a disappointment there. As the high heights that we saw out of Mike Trout early on in his career, I just think those days are over. Teams that are interested in him need to have a DH spot available, and we'll see where he ultimately ends up going. A trade idea that was floated out there as well was him going to New York, playing at their DH spot or a corner outfield spot instead of Juan Soto, maybe a Giancarlo Stanton, and maybe a prospect or two going back to the Angels. That could work, but again, I'm just not seeing the incentive for the Angels to get this deal done. Artie Moreno isn't going to trade him to the Dodgers, obviously. In the same market, giving up both of his top 2 superstars to that team, that just would be a slap in the face to the Angels organization as a whole. Love Ron Washington and the direction they seem to be going with this rebuild, if they can stick to it. But it's going to be a very, very long time until we're talking about the Angels being a competitive team in the AL West, let alone for a World Series title. A's right now are going to be in the gutter in that division. Angels right behind him. So that's kind of your headlines right now. We're going to have a little bit of a live later on this evening as well, just to kind of make sure nothing else pops off. But just wanted to get you guys updated on what's been happening around Major League Baseball. Let us know in the comments section, what your thoughts are on the Ronaldo Lopez possibility of being a starting pitcher for the Braves, Sonny Gray possibly going there as a starter, Aaron Nola back to the Philadelphia Phillies, Lance Lynn going back home to the St. Louis Cardinals, where he began his career and found all that success early on. Then, of course, the big news, Yamamoto officially being posted. How quickly do you think this resolves? Where do you think he goes? The money? How many years do you think he ultimately ends up getting? Does the Kodai Senga argument from the New York Mets, basically saying that he wants him in that starting rotation right now, kind of all for it, all that kind of thing, putting pressure on that New York Mets front office to get a deal done for Yamamoto? Do you think he goes there? Or is it another disappointment for the New York Mets after they were not able to get their top choice as manager, Craig Counsell? Do they miss out on another top choice at starting pitcher in Yamamoto? That organization seems to be kind of spinning their tires at certain points, and hopefully they can get some traction going soon. Other news from around Major League Baseball: Max Scherzer was on Foul Territory TV on YouTube earlier today. Had some interesting comments to talk about the pitch clock, talking about the severity of the injuries experienced by pitchers. I'm not sure how legitimate some of the arguments he made were. Got to take everything with a grain of salt. Former baseball union, guy, and really argues for, he's a really good advocate for players. But I'm just wondering how factual the things that he was saying were. He said both Neil Meister and Neil Elitrosh, the top 2 doctors in the world right now as far as sports injuries, injury repair, surgeries, those types of things, basically said that injuries are getting more severe. I've yet to see any comments from either of those 2 doctors saying something to that effect. Max Scherzer saying that he spoke with both of those 2, and that's what they told him. So it remains to be seen what happens with the pitch clock going forward. Absolutely was a great thing as far as from the fan experience was last year was that pitch clock really kind of eliminated all the dead time we saw. There's an argument to be made that, from Major League Baseball's perspective anyway, that they could decrease the pitch clock from 20 seconds to 18 seconds with runners on base. Curious to see, what kind of pushback the players are going to have. I'm already happy with the pitch clock right now. I would go ahead and just say, hey, let's hold up and wait a few years and just see, where where we're at as a sport. The other thing I would consider, as far as from the fan experience side of things, is getting that automatic strike zone. I'm tired of seeing players and managers and umpires all arguing over balls and strikes. I'm tired of seeing one guy who's able to call the strike zone fairly accurately, but still miss a ball that's 6 inches outside that decides a game. We saw that in the World Series. We saw a makeup call in the World Series because of a ball strike call. And these things, I know everybody likes to say, well, it's human error. We got to have some of the humans in the game. The umpires are still going to be there. They still have a job. Somebody has to relay the signal of whether or not it was a strike or ball. The umpire can then determine whether or not the batter actually went through the zone on a swing, on a check swing anyway. He can pay more attention on whether or not there's a balk, especially when you consider the disengagement rule and how much umpires are now relied on to handle the pitch clock as well. They have some additional responsibilities. Ball strikes, at this point, we've seen how tennis uses technology to determine whether or not a ball was in or out of the line. Baseball has been working on several different systems over the last 3 or 4 years to see which type of system works best, to see what is actually a strike and what's a ball. And at some point over the next 365 days, I think we're going to see Major League Baseball institute an automatic strike zone. So I think the biggest reason why we haven't seen it as of yet is because the umpires union basically saying, hey, we don't want this. Our job is our job. We don't want to do this. But I think for the betterment of the game, I think we're going to see this happen. And I think it'd be great for baseball to try to get the automatic strike zone nailed down. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are on the automatic strike zone, ball strikes. Is that something you guys would like to see in the game? Or would you like to see it still called with the human error element behind the plate? So we'll see what happens there. Appreciate you guys joining us. We'll be live for you guys a little bit later tonight as well. Just kind of wanted to give you guys an early update on what's been happening today. We had a video post just a few minutes ago about the Yamamoto being posted by the Oryx Buffaloes, and then later on this evening we'll have another video being posted about the Lance Lynn signing. That one being posted, I believe, at 8:30. We'll be live at about 9 o'clock tonight for you guys. Appreciate you guys joining us early. We'll see you guys a little bit later on this evening.